The sun was starting to dip below the horizon, casting a warm amber glow over the sleepy town of Maplewood. Emma Johnson, a soft-spoken young woman in her late 20s, strolled down Main Street with her younger sister Chloe. They had just left the farmer's market, arms full of fresh produce and homemade peach preserves. The early evening air was crisp with the scent of pine and freshly cut grass. Children played hopscotch on the sidewalks, and the smell of grilled hot dogs drifted from a nearby food truck. Life in Maplewood was simple, almost old-fashioned, exactly the kind of town where everyone knew everyone. As they turned the corner by the old post office, Emma suddenly stopped in her tracks. Her eyes fell on a man sitting against the red brick wall, scruffy, quiet, and seemingly invisible to the rest of the world. He wore a faded army green jacket, torn at the sleeves, and boots that looked like they'd walked across the whole country. His hair was unkempt, his hands calloused, but his posture wasn't slouched like most folks down on their luck. He stared at the ground in silence, as though lost in thought. Chloe followed her sister's gaze and let out an exasperated sigh. "Emma, really? He's just another homeless guy. Come on, let's go. Dinner won't cook itself." But Emma didn't move. Something about the man tugged at her heart. He looked worn, yes, but not hopeless. There was something in his stillness that felt heavy. Not desperate. Just tired. "He's different," Emma murmured. Chloe scoffed. "Different how?" "He's sitting on the ground like a lost puppy. You gonna bring him home and feed him too?" Without replying, Emma reached into her purse and pulled out a $5 bill. She stepped closer and gently placed it beside him on the sidewalk. The man slowly looked up, his eyes a striking hazel, surprised, even confused by her gesture. He looked as if he hadn't heard kindness in a long time. "Thank you," he said, voice low but clear. Emma smiled softly. "Please, get yourself something to eat." Chloe groaned and shook her head as Emma returned to her side. "You and your bleeding heart," she muttered. "This isn't a Hallmark movie, Emma." Emma simply replied, "If I can help one person, just one, maybe it means something." They continued walking, Chloe rattling on about their mother's likely reaction. But Emma's thoughts lingered on the man. She didn't know his name. She didn't know his story. But something about him stayed with her. In a town full of familiar faces, that one unfamiliar soul had left a mark. Back at the Johnson home, a sprawling colonial-style house on the corner of Willow Creek Road, Emma stepped through the front door just behind Chloe. The aroma of pot roast lingered faintly in the air, though the kitchen lights were off. Margaret, their stepmother, was settled into her usual spot on the living room couch, a cup of chamomile tea in hand and the television muted on a rerun of Wheel of Fortune. Chloe wasted no time stirring the pot. "Mom, you won't believe what Emma did today," she announced, dropping her reusable market bags with a dramatic flair. Margaret looked up, narrowing her eyes. "What now?" "She gave money to a homeless man. Just like that. Bent down, talked to them like they were long-lost friends." Chloe shook her head in mock dismay. "You'd think she was running a soup kitchen on Main Street." Emma quietly set her groceries down on the counter. She knew what was coming. Margaret's expression hardened as she turned toward Emma. "Is that true?" "Yes," Emma replied calmly. "He looked hungry. I gave him $5. Margaret stood, her tone firm and disapproving. "Emma, we've talked about this. We are not made of money. You don't just go handing out bills to strangers like it's Monopoly. Your father worked hard for what we have. And now it's my job to keep us afloat." Emma's voice was soft but steady. It wasn't waste. It was kindness. Chloe folded her arms. Well, I wouldn't throw my future away on some guy in rags. Unlike Emma, I plan on marrying into the Harrington family. Margaret's entire demeanor shifted, her frown replaced with a small smile. Now that's a smart girl, she said proudly. The Harringtons are the wealthiest family in this part of the state. If you play your cards right, Chloe, you'll never have to worry about bills or budgets again. Emma turned away, the familiar ache blooming in her chest. This wasn't new. Since their father passed 5 years ago, she had grown used to being the shadow in the house, supportive, quiet, and mostly ignored. She paid the property taxes, kept the lights on, and worked full-time at the local bank. But it was Chloe, fresh out of college with no job and a questionable boyfriend, who got the praise and the promises. "I'm going to my room," Emma said, heading upstairs without waiting for a response. Margaret barely looked up. "Good. Maybe you'll think twice next time before tossing money at drifters." Upstairs, Emma sat at the edge of her bed, the mattress sagging slightly under her weight. Outside, the autumn wind rustled the maple trees in the yard. She looked out the window and thought of the man on the sidewalk, his eyes, his voice. She didn't know why, but helping him had felt like the first right thing she'd done in a long time. And she didn't regret it. The following Tuesday, after a long shift at Maplewood Community Bank, Emma chose to take the scenic route home. The late afternoon sun filtered through the golden oak trees that lined the sidewalks, casting a soft, dappled light on the pavement. Her heels clicked steadily against the concrete, a comforting rhythm after hours spent balancing ledgers and handling customer complaints. As she neared the corner by Miller's Hardware, her steps slowed. Up ahead, she spotted a familiar figure, tall but slightly hunched, his stride uneven and slow. It was Jake, the same man she'd given money to a few days earlier. He looked even more worn now. His boots were scuffed to the soles, and sweat clung to his brow despite the cool breeze. Without hesitation, Emma approached him. "Jake, right?" she asked gently. The man turned, surprised. Recognition lit up his face. "You remembered." Emma nodded. "You look exhausted. Have you eaten today?" Jake chuckled softly, but there was no humor in it. "Not since yesterday. I was trying to get across town, but, well, that's a long walk when you've got no bus fare and 2 aching feet." Emma reached into her handbag and pulled out a few dollar bills, just enough for a bus ride and a meal. "Here," she said, pressing the money into his hand. "Please, get some food and a place to rest for a while." Jake stared at the cash, his hand shaking slightly. "You've already helped me once. I can't keep taking from you." "It's not about taking," Emma replied, her voice warm. "It's about someone needing a hand. I'd want someone to do the same for me." For a moment, Jake said nothing. Then he looked her in the eye, his voice low and sincere. "Thank you. I don't think I've ever had someone look at me like I wasn't invisible." Emma smiled. "You're not invisible, Jake. You're just in a tough season." They stood in silence for a beat. Behind them, a UPS truck rumbled down the street. The bells on the door of the corner diner jingled as someone stepped out, the scent of grilled onions briefly filling the air. "I hope I see you again," Jake said as he tucked the money away. Emma nodded. "I think you will." They parted ways then, Jake heading toward the bus stop, Emma continuing her walk. But her heart felt lighter than it had in weeks. Maybe it was the crisp fall air. Maybe it was the smile he'd given her. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the feeling that her kindness had truly mattered. Back home, the house was quiet except for the soft ticking of the antique clock in the foyer. Chloe was out. Margaret was likely upstairs reading one of her home and garden magazines. Emma set her purse down and looked out the front window toward the fading sky. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen by someone who had nothing and yet had somehow given her something back. The house was quiet when Emma came home that Thursday evening, the kind of heavy silence that usually meant tension was waiting around the corner. She stepped into the kitchen, placed her tote bag on the counter, and was about to make a cup of tea when she heard voices, Chloe's, shrill and mocking, and Brandon's lazy drawl. They were in the living room, as usual, scrolling on their phones and sharing sarcastic jokes. Emma tried to slip past unnoticed, but Chloe looked up with a smirk. Well, if it isn't Mother Teresa herself. Been feeding the homeless again? Emma sighed, brushing off the comment. Not today. Brandon snorted. I think she's in love. Next thing you know, she'll bring that guy home and ask Mom to set a place for him at dinner. Don't tempt her, Chloe added, giggling. She probably already bought him a toothbrush. Emma paused, her patience thin. At least Jake is trying. Unlike the two of you who've been out of college for nearly 2 years and still haven't applied for a single job. Chloe's smile faded. Brandon sat up straighter. Excuse me? You heard me, Emma said, her voice firm. I work 5 days a week at the bank to help keep this house running. I pay the water bill, the internet, half the mortgage. And still, you both act like I'm the embarrassing one. Before either of them could fire back, Margaret appeared at the top of the stairs, her face tight with irritation. What is this arguing I'm hearing? Chloe wasted no time. Emma's been sneaking around with that homeless guy again. She's practically dating him now. Margaret's expression shifted instantly from annoyed to furious. Is that true? Emma stood her ground. His name is Jake. And he's not just some homeless guy. He's a person. A good one. He was attacked the other night by street thugs, and he's got nowhere safe to go. So what? Margaret snapped. You want to bring him here? Emma hesitated. Margaret's voice rose. Have you lost your mind? Bringing a man off the street into my home? What do you think this is, a halfway house? He needs help. Just a warm bed until he recovers. No, Margaret interrupted coldly. Absolutely not. If you insist on involving yourself with that kind of person, you can do it outside these walls. Because I will not have him in my house. Emma's hands clenched at her sides. Why is kindness always a crime in this family? Margaret glared down at her. Because you're a fool. And fools don't survive in this world. Emma stared at her stepmother, at Chloe, at Brandon, and something inside her hardened. She turned and headed for the door without another word. If home wouldn't offer a place for compassion, then maybe it wasn't home anymore. The wind had picked up by the time Emma found Jake again, curled up behind the dumpster behind Hank's auto garage on the edge of town. She hadn't seen him in 2 days, and her chest tightened when she saw the dry blood on his lip and the purple bruise blooming under one eye. Jake, she whispered, rushing to his side. He stirred, lifting his head weakly. Emma, he croaked. What happened? She asked, kneeling down on the cold pavement beside him. Who did this to you? Jake winced as he tried to sit up. A couple of guys said I was trespassing. Told me this wasn't my turf. I didn't have anywhere else to go. Her jaw clenched. She'd heard about territorial street gangs, but it was different seeing the aftermath in someone she cared about. Come on, she said, helping him to his feet. You need stitches. We're going to the clinic. He resisted. Emma, no. I don't have insurance. I can't pay for anything. You don't have to, she said firmly. I'll cover it. Jake looked at her, eyes wide. Why would you do that? She met his gaze. Because someone has to. And right now, I want that someone to be me. It took 20 minutes to reach the urgent care center near Maplewood Park. The nurse on duty didn't ask questions, just helped get Jake cleaned up, stitched, and resting on a cot in the back. Emma stayed by his side the entire time, handing him water and gently brushing the dirt from his forehead. When the nurse stepped out to fill a prescription, Jake turned to her. You're different, he said softly. Most people see me and cross the street. You sit next to me. Emma smiled faintly. Maybe I'm just stubborn. No, Jake said, his voice full of quiet awe. You're kind. Kind in a way I didn't think people were anymore. They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, wind chimes jingled from the porch. A little boy giggled in the waiting room, watching cartoons on a small screen. Jake finally spoke again. I've been lying to you, Emma. She looked at him, heart skipping. About what? My name isn't just Jake. It's Jacob Harrington. Emma blinked. The name hit like a wave. Harrington? As in Harrington Industries? He nodded slowly. That's my family. I'm their only son. She felt the breath leave her body. I left that world behind for a while, he said. To find someone who saw me for me, not for a fortune or a last name. You saw me. You helped me without knowing anything about who I really was. Emma stared at him, heart pounding. I couldn't tell you before. I had to be sure. But now, I am. For the first time in her life, Emma realized that her kindness had not only found someone in need, it had uncovered a truth she never saw coming. The black SUV glided smoothly down the long driveway of the Harrington estate. Emma sat quietly in the passenger seat, her hands folded tightly in her lap. It had only been 24 hours since Jacob Harrington, had revealed who he truly was. She still hadn't found the right words to say. It felt like stepping into a novel she never meant to read. As they approached the mansion, Emma stared at the towering iron gates, the ones she had only ever seen in local newspapers during charity galas or business announcements. Beyond the gates sat a pristine white estate with towering columns, wraparound porches, and lanterns glowing warmly in the dusk. It looked more like a museum than a home. I should have warned you, Jacob said gently, watching her reaction. Emma shook her head. It's not the house. It's just all of this. You lived on the streets when you could have been here? Jacob nodded. I needed to know what the world looked like without my name. I needed to know what people looked like without it. The SUV came to a stop, and a uniformed driver opened her door. Emma stepped out hesitantly, taking in the manicured lawn and the flicker of fireflies over the hedges. As they walked up the front steps, the door opened to reveal a warm, elegant woman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes. You must be Emma, she said, stepping forward with a graceful smile. I'm Eleanor. Jacob's mother. Emma managed a polite smile. It's nice to meet you, ma'am. And I'm William, said the deep voice behind her. Jacob's father stepped forward, tall and distinguished, extending a firm handshake. Welcome to our home, Emma. We've heard quite a lot about you. Emma's cheeks flushed. I hope it was good. William chuckled. All good. And more than earned. They led her into a grand living room where a fire crackled in the stone hearth. The chandeliers sparkled overhead, and classical music played softly in the background. Emma sat down on the edge of a velvet armchair, still feeling like a guest in a dream. Jacob stepped forward, clearing his throat. "There's something I need to do before this night goes any further." Emma turned toward him and froze. He was down on one knee. The room fell silent as Jacob pulled a velvet box from his jacket pocket. Inside was a ring that sparkled like morning dew on glass, delicate, timeless, and stunning. "Emma," he said, his voice full of quiet certainty, "you gave me hope when I had nothing. You saw me when no one else did. And now, I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you never feel invisible again." Emma's eyes filled with tears. Her heart swelled. "Yes," she whispered, barely able to speak. "Yes, Jacob." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Eleanor clapped softly, and William nodded with approval. For the first time in her life, Emma felt like she belonged. Not for what she could offer, but for who she truly was. The Johnson household wasn't as warm as it used to be. The evenings felt colder, though it was only early October. The living room sat in silence most nights, no laughter, no music, just the soft drone of the television playing to no one in particular. Margaret paced more these days, worry creasing her brow. Chloe was spending more and more time out of the house, returning late with red eyes and short tempers. Brandon had taken to sleeping in until noon and avoiding the mail pile that kept growing on the hallway table. Then, on a dreary Tuesday morning, everything unraveled. Margaret stormed into the living room holding a crumpled notice in her hand, her voice trembling with fury. "Where is Chloe?" Brandon looked up from the couch, startled. "What's going on?" Margaret slammed the paper on the coffee table. "This says our house is in foreclosure. Someone mortgaged the property and missed 3 payments." Brandon's eyes widened. "Wait, what? How?" Just then, Chloe walked in, her oversized sunglasses perched on her head, chewing gum like she didn't have a care in the world. Margaret turned on her. "What did you do?" Chloe shrugged. "Relax, Mom. I borrowed against the house to help Tyler invest in a business idea. He said he'd double our money in 6 months." "Tyler?" Margaret gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "The same boy who's been in and out of trouble with the police?" "He's not that bad." "He's gone, Chloe." Margaret screamed. "The bank is seizing the house. We have nowhere to go." Brandon looked pale. "You mean we're being evicted?" Margaret didn't answer. The knock on the front door did that for her. When she opened it, 2 suited men stood holding official documents. "We're with Midstate Mortgage," one of them said calmly. "We're here to initiate the repossession. You've had 3 months to respond." As the agents walked through the house, making notes and taking pictures, Chloe stood frozen, the weight of her decisions crashing down like thunder. Brandon turned on the TV in a daze, hoping for distraction, but what came on next only made things worse. "Breaking news," the anchor said brightly. "America's most eligible bachelor, Jacob Harrington, has announced his engagement to a woman the world is now calling the Cinderella of Maplewood, Miss Emma Johnson." The screen showed Emma in a golden gown, smiling beside Jacob at a glamorous photo shoot. Chloe stared at the screen in horror. "Emma?" Margaret collapsed onto the couch, whispering, "She's marrying that Harrington?" Brandon's jaw dropped. "We laughed at her. Mocked her. And now, she's about to become one of the most powerful women in the state." Outside, the wind picked up, rustling through the dying leaves. Inside, the Johnsons sat in silence, stripped of their wealth, their comfort, and the daughter they had never truly loved. the Harrington estate had never been so alive. Golden ribbons danced in the autumn breeze as guests arrived in tailored suits and elegant gowns, stepping out of black sedans and vintage cars. The grand ballroom was lined with glowing chandeliers, ivory roses, and silver-trimmed chairs. Soft music floated through the air, and a harpist played near the fountain where Emma and Jacob would soon say their vows. Emma stood near the top of the staircase, her gown a vision of satin and lace, hand-stitched with tiny pearl beads. Her hair was swept back beneath a delicate veil, and her diamond ring glinted like a promise kept. Downstairs, the crowd quieted as Jacob took his place at the altar. Among the guests, seated in the very back row, far from the inner circle, sat Margaret, Chloe, and Brandon. Their expressions were stiff, their clothes borrowed and outdated, their presence allowed only because Eleanor Harrington had extended a polite invitation out of grace, not obligation. Chloe clutched her purse tightly as the ceremony began. The soft notes of canon and D played, and the doors opened. Emma appeared at the top of the aisle, escorted by William Harrington, who had insisted on giving her away. As she walked slowly toward Jacob, her eyes swept across the room, meeting, for the briefest second, the stunned, regretful gaze of the family she had once called her own. When the vows were spoken and the crowd erupted in applause, Margaret stood shakily. "We have to talk to her," she whispered, pulling Chloe up with her. As the ceremony ended, and Emma and Jacob prepared to exit, Margaret and Chloe rushed forward. "Emma," Margaret called, her voice breaking. "Please, just a moment." Emma paused. Chloe stepped ahead, tears brimming in her eyes. "I know we don't deserve this, but I'm sorry. I was cruel, selfish, and I treated you like less. You didn't deserve it." Margaret added, "I failed you. As a guardian, as a woman, as a mother. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed to say it." The room fell still, guests watching with curiosity and sympathy. Emma looked at them, no anger in her eyes, only calm. "I forgive you," she said softly. "Not because you asked, but because I've let go." Chloe sniffled, daring a hopeful smile. "But I've moved on," Emma continued. "And this life I've found, is not a reward for wealth. It's what love, dignity, and grace look like when they're honored. I'm no longer the girl who begged for kindness in her own home." She turned back to Jacob, who took her hand, steady and strong. As they walked down the aisle together, the crowd applauded once more, but Emma barely heard it. All she felt was peace. Behind her sat the remnants of her past, watching the woman they once dismissed walk into a future they could no longer touch. And for the first time in her life, Emma Johnson didn't just feel seen. She felt free. As we grow older, many of us come to understand that life is not just about success, status, or the number in a bank account. It's about the choices we make when no one's watching, the people we become through hardship, and the values we choose to hold on to when others cast them aside. Emma's story is more than a fairy tale, it's a quiet, powerful reminder of what truly matters in this world. At the heart of her journey is a simple act of kindness. In a world that often moves too fast and judges too quickly, Emma paused. She looked a struggling man in the eye and saw a human being, not a burden. That moment changed everything, not because she expected something in return, but because she acted from a place of compassion. It's a lesson many of us have learned over time, that kindness is never wasted. It doesn't always come back in the form we expect, but it always leaves a mark on others and on our own hearts. Her experience also speaks to the importance of integrity. Emma stood firm in her values, even when her own family mocked her. She chose dignity over comfort and principle over approval. That isn't easy to do, especially in a world that often rewards shortcuts and appearances. But as we age, we see more clearly that the people who matter most are those who choose what's right, not what's easy. Perhaps one of the most powerful messages is the value of being seen, truly seen, for who we are. Many older adults have lived through times when they felt invisible, overlooked, or undervalued. Emma's story offers a gentle affirmation that even if the world doesn't always acknowledge us, our worth doesn't fade. In fact, it often shines brightest when we are honest, humble, and unwavering in our convictions. Finally, this story reminds us that redemption is possible, but not always in the form we think. Emma forgives her family, but she doesn't return to the life that hurt her. That boundary, that clarity, is an important part of healing. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting, it means releasing ourselves from the weight of resentment, even if we must still walk away. For those of us in our later years, Emma's story may echo experiences from long ago, times when we stood alone, chose decency over pride, or offered kindness when it wasn't returned. It's never too late to be like Emma. We may not all end up in mansions or marry into wealth, but we can still choose grace, choose love, and choose to treat others with humanity. Those are riches that never fade. And in the end, that might just be the life most worth living.